Hello, everybody, and welcome to In the Doll World. I am your host, Georgette Taylor, along with my amazing and fabulous co-host, Tammy Fisher.
Thank you, dear.
And today we're here with an amazing guest. Her name is Amy Jandrisevits, and she is the owner of A Doll Like Me. And what I love about her business, she makes cloth dolls, but she makes cloth dolls for children with differences. And I know me and Tammy talk about this all the time about having a doll that represents who you are,
Hmm.
dolls that matter for the person who's receiving them. And that's what Amy does. She creates amazing dolls for these children that look like them. And so I want to welcome you, Amy, to the show
Thank
and
you.
welcome you to In the Doll World. Thank you so much for being here. We always start off with people telling their journey and their stories about how they started creating dolls. And so I'd like to know, like for you to share with our audience a little bit more about you and how you started to um, uh, embark on this journey of creating dolls for children that didn't have dolls that represented who they were.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
You're so welcome.
Um, I think I told you when we first talked that I am a doll collector and I've
Hmm.
collected dolls always. Um, and I really like unusual dolls. And so um, I think back when I first started collecting, pretty much the only one with kind of any type of diversity was Madame Alexander. And
Mm.
those were my first dolls of the world. You remember those? Those were the first
Hmm.
ones that I really collected. But I really liked baby dolls. You know, something that you could take care of.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I actually have my master's degree in social work, and so my job out of college was in a pediatric oncology unit. And when
Okay.
you do therapy in a hospital setting, dolls are critical, right?
Hmm.
That's a really important part of therapy. And one of the things that is critical is having dolls that look like the kids that you're talking to, right? So if you're going to have a child who's going to go through chemotherapy, and let's say that it's a child of color who's bald and has scars, you want a doll that looks like that. And that's really hard. You know, granted, this was 20 years ago. So, and
Wow.
that's really hard to find now,
Hmm.
let alone back then. And I always tell this story. I have a little girl. My youngest is 5, and she's our recessive trait baby. And so she has blonde hair and blue eyes. I don't know where she got that. But when she first, and we're not overly princessy type people, but the first time she watched Cinderella, the first words out of her mouth were, "I wish I had blonde hair and blue eyes." And it was a really, um, it was a really humbling moment for me because we're not, like I said, we don't push that type of
Hmm.
narrative on her. And the crazy part of it is that she does look like that. And so you think of the millions of kids that don't look like a
Hmm.
Disney princess, and you think about what that does to a child's identity. So for my child, who's around dolls with differences, she has been her whole life, and who does have blonde hair and blue eyes, for her to come up with something like that totally blew my mind. Um,
Yeah.
and you think about then all of the kids who don't see themselves on the store shelves and what that does to them. And so,
Mm.
you know, going back to doing social work, it was such a misfit to say to a child of color, for example, pretend that this blonde haired, blue eyed doll, pretend that that's you, and this is what's going to happen. And we ask kids to do that all the time. Um, and so even back then, I thought, gosh, what an incredible gap in the market there is. Um, and I have sewn, my mom taught me how to sew when I was really young. Um, and I had also sewn. So my parents live in Los Angeles, and she worked in South Central Los Angeles and wrote a grant for like an early intervention program. And one of the hallmark pieces of that was finding dolls of color that looked like the kids who would play with them. And at the time, I mean, where would you go? So that's, 20 some years ago.
Hmm.
Where would you go to find that, right? You don't just go to, at that time, Toys R Us, scan the aisles and say, this is perfect. And so I actually started sewing some for her for this grant, just casually. And so I've always been able to sew that type of a thing. And so then so this was just when I was pregnant with our youngest, I was doing Raggedy Ann dolls, and I was doing Raggedy Ann dolls, particularly dolls of color that looked, for example, I live in Wisconsin, and so the Packers are huge here. And so I would do a doll with darker skin, wearing Packers. And that was a Raggedy Ann. I love Raggedy Anns. And I thought kind of that was the direction I was going to go. And just for fun, I made a doll. And, Facebook and social media is pretty incredible. And somebody on social media saw this doll that I'd done, and it looked like her little girl, except her little girl had just had a leg amputated. And so she asked if I would do that doll with an amputated leg. And it's something that is so simple. And I did my research about what was out there. And when you look at some of the images, and I know I'm probably preaching to the choir on this one, when you look at how media represents a certain group of people, it's often really offensive. And so I kind of looked out there and I thought, this is the way they see these kids. And so I thought, you know what, I have a skill set. I can make a doll like that. I did. And it was shared on social media. And then in, 2 months, I had 200 doll orders.
Wow.
And that was only for dolls. Yeah. Only dolls with limb differences. So we're talking about, I always say to look at, your 10 fingers, there are a million permutations of this, right? There's, no fingers, there's half fingers, there's 3, and so it's such a small community of people that I think people felt like for the first time, my child may be represented. And I think that it's one of those things that I was never going into it thinking I'm going to have a business or I'm going to own a nonprofit. It's one of those things that I had the skill set and it just happened. It was pretty, I still am amazed, all these years later.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Well, I mean, it's because I think what you said is true. You get a feeling of belonging, and I think that's important.
And I think that we, our logical brain tells us when you're doing play therapy with a child, a doll is everything. I mean, that's a really key part of play therapy. Yet on the other hand, we don't offer anything that looks like the kids that they represent, right? So it's one of those things where you say to a child, you know what, you're beautiful, you're perfect just the way you are, but you're never going to see something that looks like you. And you could say that for so many things. You could say that for medical differences. You could say that for skin color, right? Because even now, if I went to Target, there are 2 types of dolls, right? There's a Caucasian blonde, and then there's typically that Caucasian blonde painted brown. And there's no, very dark skin. There's no mix. I mean, it's a really, the market is really, it's very interesting for something that we know matters to so many kids. I think American Girl, when, it was first started, was pretty remarkable in that respect, in offering, all different types of skin tones and hair and all of that. It's just still amazing to me that it hasn't caught on like it should. You figure Barbie took, right? And so it took until a year ago to have a Barbie with a prosthetic leg. And people have had those for as long as we've known people existed, right?
Yes.
Why did it take so long, for the toy market to catch up? Things like, and I think American Girl, again, I have no criticism of that company. I think when they offered, the Girl of the Year has a hearing aid, and that's a really big deal, but it shouldn't be.
Right. Yes.
Think about how many people you can go out in public. People have hearing aids all the time. And why was it such a big deal that a doll was, you know what I mean?
What I think is really interesting, and I applaud you for what you're doing, because I think that there need to be dolls who look like everybody. And one of the things that I talked to someone about before we got this, before we started in the doll world, we have a friend, Nav Sikand, in Britain. And we were talking about I was talking to him about working with Ama Gay in Britain, and she gives away black dolls. And he was talking about, because I was saying, she's saying she's having a hard time finding black dolls. I help her find them. He says, yeah, even ginger dolls. So you're in Great Britain, you're an island next door to Ireland,
Right.
and there's no redhead dolls. What is that? So I mean, it's something that's happening all over the world, and I think it's really important. And I'm really excited to be in the doll world right now, because we are seeing people like you and doll makers. We're seeing the albino doll, dolls with albinism, the dolls with vitiligo, dolls with textured hair. We're seeing mixed race dolls, just whole plethora of
That's true.
diversity. And that's one of the things that we like to celebrate here in the doll world, is diversity, the diversity in the doll world. So thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny when you just mentioned albinism. So shortly after I started doing this, then a mom reached out, and she had adopted a little girl from China with albinism. And so she had the Chinese features, but then the white hair and the, the blue eyes. And she was like, I know this is a long shot, but this is like my last window.
Wow.
Would this be something that you would consider? And it was one of those things where it was like, of course,
Yes.
And again, you realize, so you look up, how do people represent in dolls kids like that? And I think as a parent, it would be offensive, and, heaven forbid you'd show your kid. I don't want people to think that's how they see these kids,
Right. Right.
So yeah, there's so many things. And then you can throw in something like a medical condition, and it's non-existent. I have one here.
Oh, great.
A little guy, I don't know how well you can see him.
Yeah.
So he has, this is a disorder where you get skin sores, all over your body.
Okay.
Wow.
And so it's actually a neat story, because he and his sister have created a campaign. Like this campaign is called Say Hi to Eli. And it's, don't stare, just come up and say hi. Because this is a kid too.
Yeah.
And so they'd asked me, quite a while ago to do a doll of him. And you think about, where else would you go? You can't just run to Target, right? And say, I'm going to go pick up something that looks like this. Or, I mean, even an Asian doll, right? That's, I don't know that I have ever seen that.
Yeah, I don't.
In like a main, main store, shopping store.
No.
I know that they exist.
Yeah,
but, there's so many different. And then he has a feeding tube as well.
Wow.
Oh, okay.
That's incredible.
Yeah, that is incredible. That is so
I'm really
neat.
excited for him to get this doll.
Oh, you are.
Yeah.
He's excited to get it. Yeah, so that's just beautiful. I love that.
Yeah. Some of the dolls she makes are just incredible,
Yeah.
And
I think it shows you how desperate people are, right? How desperate people are. You'd go to the ends of the earth for your child or your grandchild or your foster child, whoever it is. You would go to the ends of the earth, and people obviously have, because these dolls are sent all over the world. But I think that people think this could be a real validation for my child.
Yes.
So it's really quite amazing, I think.
Yeah. And so what you're doing is so important, because you can't see what it feels like to be Eli. So to be able to give Eli a face and give him a doll that says, Eli, you're beautiful just as you are, is really important.
It's so powerful.
That's that that you're beautiful just as you are. That's I love that, because I think that when you look at a child, you look at the holistic view of a child, and you have to look at things, you know, you look at the medical care, but you have to look at the emotional and the mental piece as well. And I think that we have to build kids up, right? And
Right.
that's one way that we do it. You know, look, like you said, your child has brown eyes, you have a wheelchair, you
Right.
have, you know, whatever, a hearing aid, and you know, it should be so natural if that's where we really want to head, right?
Yes.
I so agree with that. And I think one of the perks, I think, of social media is that in posting pictures of dolls with their kids, it makes it human, right? There's this photographer that I follow, and he photographs endangered species. And one of the things he said was, and I thought it was so profound, I actually had to turn it back and write it down. And he said, we have to look into the eyes of these animals so that we care about them.
Care about them.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
You won't love what you don't save, was his exact words. And I think about that with these kids. You have to look at their faces, look at those eyes, and care about who they are. And I think it's so powerful when, you know, you see these kids with their dolls and you see what an impact representation has. You know, we talk about it a lot. I mean, you remember when stars used to wear those AIDS ribbons at the Academy Awards? It almost became trendy, right? And you wondered if they really knew why they were wearing that. And we use terms like representation and inclusion very callously in the same way. Do you know why we're saying that? Do you know, everybody says, yes, representation and inclusion matters. Well, what does that really look like? And I think you have to start with the very essence of childhood, and that's their toys.
Yeah.
You know, if
That's
you
so
want to
true.
speak to kids, that's where you have to start. And I think that, and I hope we're on the cusp of something different. I hope that that's where we're headed. But you look at some of these kids and you think, when do you see them in the media? When do you see them in the mainstream media? You really don't.
Right.
And when you do, it's such a big deal.
Yes.
That, you see a kid in a wheelchair in a commercial, and it's such a big deal that it becomes a news story. Why?
Why? Right. Why should that be a news story, right? You know?
That's not a news. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking it, because I think that's phenomenal. I mean, I'm so glad.
Yes.
But how long have we had limb differences in wheelchairs and hearing aid? I mean, that's not a big deal.
Yes.
And so I think these kids, they deserve to look into the face of a doll and be able to see their own. I think that's so powerful.
Yes,
and and it's not just my dolls. I just happen to see my dolls' pictures and know when you see these kids, even the really tiny ones, who look at the hands or who look at the prosthetic that they're wearing or whatever it is, it matters.
Right.
And we could talk about anything. We could talk about race, we could talk about medical condition, we could talk about body type, whatever it is. There's just so many, and there's just so many. I know you guys are preaching to the choir on the benefit of dolls, right? But dolls are really important, and historically they have been important.
Yes.
So I've been excited when the dolls appeared in the Business Insider, and they appeared in there's a worldwide a toy fair, where the stores go to figure out what toys are we going to sell this year, and they did a piece too. And I think those are so important because we're reaching a different market. You and I, we know this, but who's making the decisions, right? Make sure that they know that too. So it's been a really, for me, this has been such an interesting transition from, being able to talk about the advocacy piece as well as sitting at my dining room table and making dolls. It's pretty amazing.
That's pretty cool though. How long does it, I know, obviously, it's the time that you put into it is different based on the type of doll that you're making. But do you have an average of how much time it takes you to make a doll?
Probably. So like, his is a little bit more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's got more of he's got the feeding tube, and he's
Right.
got different components to him that are a little different. But I probably like 7 or 8 hours. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
fairly time
Okay.
consuming. A
Okay.
very simple
Okay.
one, obviously, I could do in a lot less.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes, and it's really wild, sometimes the ones that take the longest are actually the simplest, and it's the emotional piece behind
Yes.
it. So
Yes.
I
Okay.
always bristle when I talk about this as a business, because it doesn't feel like a business. These are
Mm-hmm.
children. And on the other end of this conversation I'm having with someone is a child who has experienced some pretty raw stuff.
Mm.
Yes.
One of the little guys with, these marks all over, just the other day was asked if he was a werewolf. And you
Oh,
think about what a burden some of these kids have to bear.
Wow. Wow.
Um, and so
Mm.
sometimes the hard piece is the emotional for me,
Right.
and
Yeah. I can
imagining
understand that.
what's on the other side of this. And there's a
Mm-hmm.
doll that I did fairly recently, and they know that she's terminal.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, she has days left at
Mm-hmm.
this point. And that was a really hard, and she was fairly straightforward. I mean, it was nothing, there wasn't even any hand differences. Um, but the emotional piece of it, and I always want people to know that this is not a factory. This is not
Mm-hmm.
a manufacturing plant. There's no assembly line downstairs. These are really made for each child. And I do one at a time for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
There was one that I did, gosh, and it took just probably a week to actually get through. And it was a little girl who is a Syrian refugee. And I'd like to talk about her because she's so, I think we have the privilege of being able to distance ourselves from things often. And that happens to be one of them. When you hear Syrian crisis, I think that it's so, we hear that all the time. You don't really put a face to it. And for me, this put a face to it. And it was a little girl
Mm-hmm.
who had been burned. They were a refugee family, and she was burned on half of her body. So she lost her ear and fingers, and
Mm-hmm.
looking at the burns alone it was horrible.
yes.
And the host family then, she was taken to Germany. A community kind of adopted this family, and it was the host family that asked for a doll for her.
Oh,
And it really put a face to
Mm-hmm.
that crisis for me, and remember we were just talking about this photographer, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to look at the faces of these kids
Yeah.
to care, because if we don't
yes.
care, nothing
Right.
will ever,
Nothing. Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
Yep.
And we have this, I think that the American way has become, if it doesn't affect me, oh well, right?
Yes.
Yes,
And
unfortunately.
it's unfortunate because we're this global community. And
Mhm.
when one is hurting, the rest of us should say, what can I do?
How can it help?
Right?
Yeah.
How can I help?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so interesting. And so I think that dolls have kind of become a way to reach a lot of people, to talk about, end of life, or
Mm-hmm.
what kids have to go through it. And this little girl from Syria, boy, that one was really difficult for me.
Mm-hmm.
It was even the photos were just so hard to look at. And you think, this is what kids have to go through,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
And I look at, some pictures of other kids, and I think in, a year, this doll will be what the family has to remember them.
Yeah.
And it's such a
That's true.
humbling,
Yeah.
There's one doll that I did, and her brother and sister alternate. Now she died a year ago, and they alternate who gets to sleep with her. because
Oh,
it's a physical, you know, you look
Yeah.
at these and it's a
yeah.
physical representation of the child.
Yes.
Um, and I say that a lot. I say that, you know, these are more than dolls. These are more
Mm-hmm.
than just dolls.
Yeah.
Yes.
To
Yeah.
a
So much
child,
more.
it's validation. To a family, it's, you know, it's also validation, but it's
A
um
representation or
it
something.
is,
Yeah. Yeah. A
yeah,
remembrance type of thing, you know.
yeah,
And I think too, I think it's also, you know, the fact that it touches you is because it's you put your heart and soul into creating these dolls for these children because you get to hear their stories and you know what's happening with them, and so you want to make sure that when you create this is love for you. You know, you put in love in creating these dolls, you know, to give to
absolutely.
give something to them that represents who they are. And me and Tammy talk about that all the time when we're even talking about, you know, even fashion dolls, or like you said, any type of doll that represents another type of person, or a ethnicity, you know, or the way somebody looks. I mean, it's so important uh, because dolls are something that your child is connected with at such an early age.
Yeah, there's a little boy I was actually looking at some of the dolls who, you know, aren't a straight slim Barbie, and I was
Mm-hmm.
actually
Mm-hmm.
reading some of the things that you guys have posted, and there was a little boy about a month ago who is just teased relentlessly about his weight, and
Oh.
his mom really wanted him to have a doll.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and she was so frustrated because she said the principal kept telling him, joking about your size is not, that's not bullying. And you know, you think about what these kids have to go through. I mean, I just think it's appalling. And so
Yeah.
um he got a doll and she said, you know, make it a little bit fluffier, make it a little
Right.
bit wider.
Yeah.
And he sleeps with it every night, and he's
Oh.
probably about 11 years old. And so
Wow.
Oh.
it's not, we're not talking about simply, you know, 3 and 4 and 5 year olds. We're talking about even older kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's a disturbing story because I think we need to stop telling people to toughen up, because what we're doing is we're normalizing bullying when we say that whatever it is that they're saying, if it's that it's somebody who wears yellow hair bows and people pick on them because they wear yellow hair bows, that hurts that person's feelings. Okay, so that's
Yeah.
bullying if you're talking about their yellow hair bows. So yeah, that's really disturbing. We should not be normalizing bullying. Whatever it
And
is,
that's
if it's hurting
funny,
someone's
right?
feelings, you should not
We're
be
not,
doing it.
don't toughen up these kids,
Yeah,
Right.
right?
yeah,
Teach your
Teach
kids
your
to be
kids.
yeah,
kinder, right? It's a funny, that's
exactly.
a funny, I agree with you. It's been a really, I've never understood that logic.
Yeah, me
It's a
Yeah.
neither.
backwards way of looking at it, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I think that mentality is what drives a toy market, right? That
Mm-hmm.
mentality of, you know, and Barbie's amazing. I mean, and they've come out with a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
We don't all look like that,
Nope.
you
Mm-hmm.
know. Um, and for some of these kids with, you know, very visible differences, what are we teaching them? What are we showing them in terms of how we value or validate how they look?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah,
So it's a
we're
very, it's
telling
a
them that
interesting, you know.
Yeah.
we're telling them that they're, like you said before, the fact that you know, the parents tell them that they're beautiful and that
Mm-hmm.
they're accepted and that they, you know, amazing. It's
Mm-hmm.
not so, you know, as a child you hear it, but you don't accept it because you don't necessarily see it represented beyond what your parents are saying to you.
Mm-hmm. And isn't that
And
what our
it
parents are
has
supposed to
to.
say? Yeah, because it's like your parents are supposed to say that.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I think
Right.
sometimes it feels like it's not as significant because I mean every mother is the mother of the most beautiful baby in the world.
Right,
You
right,
know,
right.
so
Right.
And that's, you
well, your
know, and
Exactly.
mom
that's
too do
funny
that.
because I
Right.
say to people, I think, you know, because I think the $1 million question has always been, why haven't you turned this into a corporation? And
Mm-hmm.
when you hear these stories, like you said, there's a mother usually on the other end
Mm-hmm.
who wants you to see the same beauty that they do.
Mm-hmm.
And they want you to capture that in a doll. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not a check the box, right? We're not going to go down the list. Okay, what skin tone do you want? Is it the right hand or the left hand? Is it the, because these kids are not check the box. That's not how this works.
Right.
You
Yes.
know, somebody
Yes.
wants you to say, you know, like this one. So she has on her, you can see her hands.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, somebody
Yeah.
on the other end wants you to say, I would fall in love with that hand too.
Oh,
Not,
yeah.
ew, gross, or
Yes.
Yeah.
oh, that's a you know, let me bring in the medical team because that's a really interesting case. Nobody wants to hear that.
No.
Yeah.
They want to hear your child is
That's
beautiful and
beautiful.
perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And they want
so-
their child to hear that from other people.
Yes,
You know,
yes.
they want their child to hear that too from other people. So.
And doll people, I have to say, are amazing. You know, so I do post pictures of kids with their dolls, and
Mm-hmm.
the community, the way they rally around these kids, I always tell parents, take a screenshot. Take a screenshot of what people have said about your child, because
Yes.
they're going to need to read this. I mean, doll people are the best.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
take a picture because they need to read that people think they're beautiful or whatever,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
Will you
that's
describe
true.
that baby's hand for our listeners?
Sure.
Okay,
So
we do
she was
YouTube and-
born, so she has one hand that's unaffected, and then you can see her other hand
Mhm.
she's got the 5 fingers,
Mhm.
but 4 of them are about a quarter of the size
Mm.
of her other hand.
Okay.
Okay.
And so this is one of the dolls with a hand difference.
Okay.
And so, you know, there's dolls that I've done who have, you know, a prosthetic leg,
Mhm.
or like a trach sometimes, or like you
Oh,
saw that
okay.
little guy has the
Mhm.
feeding
Yeah,
tube.
the feeding tube,
Right.
yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. You know, or he has, you know, different marks.
Mhm.
So you
Mhm.
can kind of see that.
Yeah.
This is actually a real one. There was a drug company that was nice enough to give me their expired samples.
Oh, okay.
And so I actually used the real thing.
Nice.
So you use the real thing for the real feeding tube.
I do, because I think that
Yes.
it's a great teaching tool.
Mhm. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. It teaches
For
them
the
too how to
child.
utilize it, and
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
And you know, it's part of who they are.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
I think that we were talking earlier about acceptance, and I think for some families, there was one who was adopting a child with her arm was missing from the elbow down, and they actually asked for a doll before she came so that the kids could get used to talking about it, seeing it, and then
Oh,
sharing
that's
with their
great.
friends
That's excellent.
before the child
Yes.
came.
Yeah.
And it was
Really
such an
good.
interesting use of the doll, you know. And then when
Yes.
she came, then they took the doll to school, because it's easier to talk about a doll. You know,
Yeah.
it's easier for the child to talk about this doll than it is, you know,
Mhm.
this is my arm, but you know, this doll has an arm like me. And it's such an interesting teaching tool. And I think but I was saying for families as well, I think it's great for their acceptance also.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Some of these things are hard, you know, to get used to. And there was another little girl that I did who has cancer. And so she had her hair at that time. And then I sent the doll bald so that she could get used to how she would look
Mhm.
before, you know, she actually lost her hair.
Oh, okay.
That's cool.
Wow. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm so excited.
Yeah.
I
just
love talking about dolls. Like when you emailed me, I thought like my 10-year-old self would be over the moon excited to be able to talk about dolls with doll people. You know, I think
Yes.
I love, you know, I love collecting them still. And I never tire of making them. In fact, I crave, especially now during the pandemic, that's like my stress release is
Yes.
making these
Yeah.
dolls.
Yeah.
How many do you make in a year?
Yeah. How many do you make in a year?
Good question. A lot. I don't know. This has been a different year because my kids are home schooling.
Okay.
But my goal is to produce several in a week.
Wow.
That's
Okay.
that's when my kids are not here. I mean, distance learning has been no joke for us.
Yes.
but yeah, there's it's just so many people who have a need. It's remarkable.
So do you
Um,
tend to do like one a day or one every couple of days or?
Probably one every couple of days.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you
But
do
yeah,
almost a
it's
couple hundred a year,
in a good
something
year.
like
Yeah.
that. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I was trying to
It's
figure out
just
with your
been a
average,
really,
how does that work?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, and you know,
That's a good number.
um, yeah, I think that this is just this is the year to be measuring it because it's just so different.
Yeah, that's
Yes, I
true.
understand that. Yes.
Yeah.
It's for all
Um,
of us
yeah.
living through Saturdays, days of Saturdays for some of us.
Yeah.
Some of us days of Mondays.
Mondays. Yes. Yes. Um, but it's just, I feel like if there's a takeaway from the conversation, it's that we all can do something.
Hmm.
I think that we talked about being this, and I think that we've been okay with being a very callous society, and we're not that way, and we shouldn't be that way. And I think that innately we all want to do something, right?
Hmm.
Yes.
And I think, for the two of you, you're storytellers, right? And that is how you're using your gift for someone else. And I
Hmm.
Hmm.
think that we all offer something. We all bring something to the table. What are you going to bring? And it could be
Yes.
as simple as call someone.
Yeah.
Somebody sent me a text yesterday and it said, I'm just checking in to see how you're doing. And it was
Oh, that's
so,
lovely. Yes.
yeah, how meaningful that is.
Yes.
A small word can change the course of your whole day. Um,
Yes.
but I think we all want to do something and we all have a skill set. Mine
Yes.
happens to be sewing.
Hmm.
Um, and we have 8 million reasons not to. I'm too busy, too tired, too old, too young, too broke,
Right.
whatever it is. We can think of a million reasons to not do something. But I think that we're, however you use it, if it's a calling, if it's a talent, or whatever, however you want to see it, I believe that we are all maybe obligated to create this global community.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, and so I would encourage people to, you never know, right?
You
You
Yes.
never
never
know.
know what something can do for someone, and you never know where it will go. If you'd
Yes.
said to me 5 years ago, you'll be talking to people about advocating through dolls, like who would have thought, use
That's
what you
true.
have where you're at, right?
It
So
started for you
simple.
so long ago, though, without you
Yes.
knowing it, right? You
Yes.
being helping your mom do that. You
Hey,
know,
I was training for this since I was
that's
one
right.
years old, and I got my first doll. I've been training for this for 47 years.
And that's why
Yes,
you're
this
so
is,
good at it.
That's why you're so good at
I am
it, right?
right. Like, hey, who knew that pushing those dolls around probably long after it was socially acceptable,
It's
you
funny.
know, was this is my way of still playing with dolls. I mean, who knew?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
Yes.
but I think we all offer something, and I think that
Yes.
people look and they say, I could never do something like that. Well, the fact is that you could. Who thought you would
Mhm.
have had a talk show, right? Who thought you would be doing this? Use
Yes.
what you have. That's your skill
Tam-
set. Use it
Tammy's
to
like, yeah,
advance
I would have
somebody
never thought.
else. Because in telling this story, if you reach one person, you're better for having done that, right?
That is the
Yes.
truth. That was the gist of me doing this, of me bringing Tammy on and us having this show, because I wanted to be able to showcase all the talent that people bring, like you, to everybody,
Yes.
not just people in the doll community. I wanted people outside of the doll community too to see what the community offered and the talent that people had and the things that they could share through dolls. And when people who are not in the doll community hear these shows, they are just as amazed about the talent and the creativity and the dolls that are showcased, because they don't get to see them on the shelves. And so they don't know that they exist. But by doing this, it helps, because when I was creating my own dolls, I met so many talented people. I just thought it would be a great opportunity for other people to know who they were. And that's really why we do the show, is to highlight people like you and Joey and and Julian and all the other people that we talk about and have as guests on these shows, because people can see the talent and they can see the purpose and passion that they have behind creating dolls. And that's, you know,
I
that's a
appreciate
good
that.
thing.
I think that's an excellent way to use a platform, you know, right? That if you have a platform, you'd be remiss to not use that opportunity to advance someone else. And the narrative that you're advancing is dolls are more than just something on your shelf. They're more than the creepy things you see in movies. Dolls really have a function, you know. And I think when you're talking about, I think what we touch on, the holistic view of a child, you know, in a medical setting, dolls are everything. And I think that sometimes we forget something so simple, you know, such a simple play toy can be really, really powerful for a child. It doesn't matter if we're talking about, you know, a medical condition or skin color. You know, it's wildly validating to be able to look into something human and see yourself. You know,
Taufik Okoye talks about dolls as tools. He refers to them as tools, and how you use these tools to help these children. So yes, they are playthings, but they are so much more. You know, he talked about realizing his child was having an identity crisis, and this identity crisis leading to creating dolls. So we have a lot of people who come in and that's everyone's doll journey is specific. But for the most part, the people that we have talked to, there was a void. And the void could have been, oh, I really loved this doll when I was younger and they didn't make it anymore and I wanted to make something, or I wanted to add to this, Mike Buse, and there needs to be a Latina doll in the vintage dolls. So, and I want to celebrate my mother and my aunties and my sisters, or people who say, I do dolls because I went to the store and I couldn't find a doll for my kid. So I started making dolls so that there would be dolls that look like my kid. That need, that void is the force behind so much creativity. You know, so
the identity crisis is that's a really good terminology, an identity crisis, right? That's a great, I'm going to write that down after we're talking, because I like that. Because you're right, it is. It's an identity crisis. And what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it for so many, you know, brown-skinned kids, for kids with, you know, birthmarks, for kids with burn marks? What are we going to do about it?
Your little girl, you, Amy, to make dolls.
Right.
Just like your little girl didn't understand that she had blonde hair and blue eyes, Taufik's little girl didn't understand that she was Black. He said she's 3 years old, and she says to him, Daddy, what color am I? And he's like, what is she asking me? She's not asking me what she's asking me, because she has to know she's Black. And he said, I told her, you know, Mommy's Black, Daddy's Black, you're Black, we're Black. He said she was asking something else. At 3 years old, she was having an identity crisis. And he said, I looked around the room and she has all these dolls. And he said she didn't have a Black doll. In Nigeria, it was difficult to get them. And he said, she needs a Black doll. My 3-year-old's having an identity crisis. And so, I mean, there's so much. And like, for me, I think it's important that you learn to nurture somebody who looks like you, because you are important. And if you are given a doll that doesn't look like you, and that's where you learn to put that energy toward nurturing and loving, that energy is not going to nurturing and loving you. So
you're so right.
You have a doll that looks like you, so that you can say,
so that's a funny
important.
There's a little boy, that's so interesting. There's a little boy that I made one for, and you just hit it. I mean, he was Chinese with albinism and had never seen himself in a mirror and didn't know that was how he looked. And so you think about the people he had seen were very dark, dark eyes, dark hair. And part of his therapy with this doll was learning to love himself. And he kept saying, He was 5.
And he hadn't seen himself in a mirror?
He hadn't seen himself. And so he
Wow.
kept saying, that's not me. And they said, no, this is you. You know, look.
Wow.
And it was such an and that was the kind of a big transition point for him, was when he accepted that that was who he was and learned how to care for this doll. So you are, I mean, you
Yeah.
are so right. I have seen that play out a number of times. You're so right.
Mhm.
That when you care for something and you love something that looks like you, it really is the ultimate self-care. You are
Yeah,
so right.
you're learning to love you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so
Yes.
true. Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. This has
Well,
been
You
really
have good
great
words of
conversation.
wisdom.
Yeah.
Man.
Look at you, Tammy.
You know, I think that part of what happens for me is, I don't know if you've ever heard my story, and I won't go into great detail, but this child, you know, I have a child who has a chronic pain condition, and watching this child play with toys, you know, I could, so she'd have the babies. When she was in a lot of pain, she'd rock babies, you know, and I could tell she was in a lot of pain. And then if she was missing school, because she couldn't go to school, she was in so much pain, she'd get 18-inch dolls and put notebooks down and play teacher. And then she had, when she was missing playing with her friends, she'd get her Monster High dolls, and she'd turn on the Monster High show, and she'd have her Barbies and her Monster High dolls, and they would be doing social interactions. So I understand, you know, from
Yeah.
being a parent, how important it is
Yeah.
for your children to have dolls, and how important it is for them, and how it helps them to express their truth. I mean, because this child's body is hurting all the time. And for them to say, you know, today I'm really having a hard time managing being me. So today I need to love me.
Mhm.
And so today I go and I get my baby and I love my baby, so
Yeah.
that I can rock my baby and make my baby feel better, because that's what I need right now.
Mhm.
And it helped me
That's the
to,
essence of play therapy.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
her own, yes, with
Yeah.
the right tools. You talk about dolls as tools.
Yes.
She did her own play therapy,
Yep.
and that's
Yes.
amazing. I mean, that's a really
Yes.
great illustration. That's
Yeah, and she did that
how
on her
play
own. I
therapy
didn't.
works.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
go to her. She did that, and
But you
so I
provided
could.
the tools,
Yes,
and
and
we
I
have
could
to have the
read.
tools available. Yeah,
Yeah.
they don't have the words. You know, their emotions are still developing. Their words are still developing, so they don't often have the capability to say,
Mhm.
I'm scared, I'm
Right.
frustrated, I'm, you know, hurting. That's what play therapy
Yeah.
does. That's so
Mhm.
interesting.
And they're also trying to process, you know, all that stuff that's happening to them as well.
Mhm.
They do have missing limbs, or they have to go through surgery all the time. I mean, it's a whole lot of stuff
Yes.
that they're processing. And so the only thing that they do have to be able to talk to is a doll or something that,
Mhm.
you know, that suits them. So yeah. But yeah,
Yeah.
you're doing amazing work, Amy. Thank you so
Yes.
much. We really
Thank you. It was
appreciate all
wonderful
the
to talk
work,
to you. Thank
all the
you.
work that
It's been
you're
wonderful to
doing.
talk
And I
to you
can't wait for
too.
people to find out more about your dolls and what you do. So just share with us where they can locate you at, and where they can read more about what you do.
So the website's under development. It will eventually, I own the domain,
Mhm.
adollikeme.com. But it will ultimately, it right now just sends you to Facebook, which is
Okay.
where you
Okay.
can see pictures. It is a nonprofit, and my goal is to make it so that nobody has to pay for these themselves.
Oh.
And so since this became a nonprofit a year and a half ago, and since becoming a nonprofit, you know, knock on wood, I've not had to charge anyone. And I think that it's the ultimate gift of humanity is to say, you know what, we do value you. A perfect stranger paid for this for you.
Nice.
And
do
so
you have
that's been a really neat part of that. That's probably one of the best parts of this. I always say,
Yes.
remember when Oprah used to say, you get a car and you get a
Right.
car, right? And I always thought, like, how cool to get to get a car, right? To be in the
Right.
audience. And you realize that the real joy is being able to say, you get a car.
Yes.
And I think, you know, granted, these aren't cars, but these are really
Oh,
personal to
much
people. And I get
more.
to be the one that tells them,
You
those
get a
same
car.
strangers that you feel judged and scrutinized by bought this for you. and you don't
Yes.
even know who they are. I mean, and that's such an amazing gift of this.
Nice.
So how do people, do you have someplace, I know you have the Facebook and you're going to be getting the website. How would I donate to you? How do our listeners and viewers
Sure.
donate?
So there's a couple ways. I mean, you can do, I do have a GoFundMe.
Okay.
I do have, you know, through PayPal, A Doll Like Me is a charity on there.
Okay.
And then
Oh,
through
okay.
Facebook. Facebook has a
Okay.
donate button. And so A
Okay.
Doll Like Me is a verified charity through there. And so, or there's obviously old fashioned checks, but it is, you know, it's set up so that this covers my supplies and it covers, you know, all of what goes into a doll, whether it's the wheelchair, the leg braces, all of that. And so, because I feel like at the end of the day, I didn't want to have to tell people, you know, everybody's got such crazy costs right now. I didn't want to have to say, oh, and great, now you need to pay for your doll. I wanted to make it 100%, don't worry about this because somebody else has your back. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, because I wonder how many children out there don't have a
Mhm.
doll that looks like them because mommy and daddy don't have the money to
Right.
buy
To do
that
that.
doll. Yes.
No, that was a really important piece of this, I think, for me. Was the missing piece was telling people, well, it's going to cost you something, because I feel like it already has. You have paid your price, you know.
Yeah.
Many times over.
Yeah, and so
Yes.
that is absolutely the neatest part of this.
Very
Yes.
cool.
Okay.
Well, we're excited. I'm
That's
sure
great.
there's going to be
Yes.
some people that's going to be reaching out to you. So
Yes,
once they
definitely.
hear your story and want to
Absolutely.
be able
Yeah.
to donate and give a doll to somebody. So
Yes.
that'll be beautiful.
Thank you. I appreciate you
Thank you.
guys. And thanks for what you're doing as well. Thanks for being the storytellers. That's a gift.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Yes, thank you.
We're so excited. I'm so excited. I can't wait for people to see the show. So
Yes.
because I think you're doing something really amazing out there. And I think people, it will resonate with so many people. Trust me.
Agree.
It really
Yes.
will.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Yes.
So thank you again for being in
All
the
right.
doll world with us, Amy.
Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
All
Okay,
right. Thank
love.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.